Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to do part 3 of our series that we began a little while ago called Science in the Bible. And it's the third group of the series so that you can hopefully understand how desperate the atheists are to get science to back up their theories. But in reality, the more we look at science and the more that science gets deeper and deeper into the exploration of the world around us, the more it seems to be that it's getting hard to disprove the existence of God. There's truth, there's accuracy, there's authority in the Bible, and as we look at it, we find out that science is confirming the Bible rather than denying it. Now the fool says, there is no God. That's the atheists, and that's what they want science to do. They want science to show that there is no God, that all of this can be explained scientifically. But remember what I told you about the word science. It means to know, knowledge. What do we actually know about the world around us and the way it operates? And as we understand it more and more, it gets to be interesting that it seems like God is in the details. Now last week we looked at the smallest item in all of creation, the atom. We looked at the atomic structure and the parts that are so small that in reality nobody has ever seen it. One of the ones that we took was a common atom. Our atmosphere is full of a gas called nitrogen. Now this is the scientific model of what scientists say the nitrogen atom appears to be, and it looks something like that. The nucleus indeed looks simple, it looks well balanced, it looks logical. But there's a problem. There's an actual impossibility right there in front of you. And science has been struggling like crazy to try and show how that's possible. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the nucleus. The nucleus is composed only of positively charged molecules. Yeah, positrons. And the shell, as they call it, around the nucleus is holding a whole bunch of negatively charged components called electrons. And the electrons are attracted by the protons, because the positive protons attract the negative electrons and hold them in a balance, kind of like gravity holds the moon in an orbit. And that's well and good, except the nucleus has a problem. Like particles repel each other. If you've ever had fun playing with magnets, you know this to be true. If you put the north to the north and the south to the south and you try and push them together, they won't go. It takes a lot of force. You can eventually get them to touch, but you have to keep holding them. Because as soon as you take pressure off, what do? They'll fly up and turn around and switch poles and then attract each other. They will not go together with the positives together and the negatives together, just like the north and the south attract each other, but the north and the south will repel each other. Now, Albert Einstein was a smart guy, and he saw this, and he kept thinking, there's something holding the atom together. The atom's nucleus should not exist. Something holds those together. And the only thing he could think about, and he wasn't an atheist, was that somehow God had done this. Now, you know, right from the very beginning, we find God creating this and creating that, and he speaks things into existence. Well, it turns out that nucleus is one of those impossibilities that God just told it, now you stay together and behave. And they do. But when Einstein looked at that, he said, you know what, there's a whole lot of energy in there somehow, holding that together. It takes energy to keep them from flying apart, so there's energy there. And he got to thinking about, well, how much energy is in the nucleus of an atom, holding it together? And he thought, you know, if I could get in there somehow and split it apart, just get it to move apart slightly, I'll bet the particles would fly apart, and that energy would be released. he wrote a whole long theory called the theory of relativity, and at the end of it he came up with this famous formula, E equals mc squared. So the energy equals the mass. Now, of course, the mass of a proton is very, very small. And the speed of light, now that's very, very big. And when you square it, it gets huge. Yeah. So the tiny little mass times this huge number equals the amount of energy released from just one atom. And as he thought about this, he eventually was able to put together the atomic bomb with the help of some other smart scientists. And sure enough, they split the nucleus of the uranium atom. They caused a chain reaction. That tremendous energy was released from it. And of course, you know what an atomic bomb creates is this huge flash of energy, the light, the heat, and then, of course, the shock wave that moves away from the center of the explosion and just knocks down almost everything in its path, even buildings. But the mushroom cloud, of course, is the result that shows once that atomic bomb goes off. So this proved to be the case. The very smallest of the basics of the universe, the atom, has an impossibility in it that science has not been able to explain. They keep making up things. Oh, there's a particle in there called a muon. Okay. There's another one in there called a boson. And there's another thing in there called a quark. And there are up quarks and there are down quarks. And now they come up with a new one called the gluon. Seriously, it's called the gluon because it glues the atom's nucleus together. Yeah, if they can't figure it out, they invent a name for it and they leave it at that. But that's not the way science should work. So now we're going to go back to the smallest structure of all living things. That smallest structure we would call the cell. Now, my first example and my first experimentations with cells was in a biology class in my second year of high school. We took a little spatula thing and we scraped the inside of our jaw and we put it on a slide, we put it under the microscope, and this is what most of us saw. Oh, look at that! I can see the nucleus in the cells, in my cheek cells. So I was quite impressed. But the boy next to me, David, he had a really worried look on his face. He was looking around and he was scared. And I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Look." So I went over to his microscope and I looked inside, and instead of seeing cheek cells like that, I saw this beautiful, glowing, rainbow-colored crystal growing. It was growing right there in front of my eyes. And he was in a panic because he was wondering, what kind of person am I that I've got this thing in my body? You know, am I a robot? Am I a cyborg? What am I? Yeah, it was kind of scary. It took us a little while. The biology teacher, she came over, she looked through his microscope and saw it. And she didn't know what it was, and finally we knew what happened. We'd had break right before the biology class, and at break time we'd go to the tuck shop and we'd buy things to eat. And he had bought some sweet candy, really sugary candy, and had been eating that at the beginning of the class. Now, you're not supposed to, but he did. And what happened was the sugar was still in his mouth. And when he scraped the inside of his mouth, he scraped off some dissolved sugar, put it on that microscope slide, and of course, as it was drying out, it was crystallizing. Sugar was crystallizing right before his eyes. So we all had a really good laugh at it, but there was something very unexpected. Now, all living things are composed of cells. What you can't really see in the cell are all of the different kinds of components that are there. These all work together and make it work as a machine that takes the energy from your blood system and uses it to convert it into energy. And then that energy we use in our muscles and other things like that so that we can live and breathe and move and do all kinds of stuff. So cells all have certain things in common, no matter whether they're plants or animals. They all have some things called cytoplasm, which is the jelly-like substance in the middle, which supports everything else. Everything else is kind of floating in that. And then there are other things in there. There are lysosomes, ribosomes, vacuoles, mitochondria, etc., all surrounding the nucleus. And all of these things basically help the nucleus to live, because the nucleus is kind of like the brain of the cell. It actually holds the DNA, and the DNA is the coding of what you are. Yeah, the DNA is what makes you tall or short or white or black, whether your hair is straight or curly, whether it's blonde or black, whether your eyes are blue or gray or green or brown. All of that comes from the information in the DNA in the nucleus. Now, we're not going to talk about the DNA this week, but next week we're going to show you some amazing stuff about the DNA. Today I just want to talk about the cell itself. Because all of these cells go through a process. They divide. Every few days, cells divide. They split into two new identical cells. And our body lives and grows this way. And there are a lot of different types of cells. Each one is specialized in a different way. Our blood cells are different from our skin cells. Those are different from our brain cells. Those are different from our muscle cells. Those are different from our brain cells. They're all specialized. But guess what? They all have exactly the same DNA in every single one of them. And yet somehow, as they divide and change, they know what to become. They know whether they're going to be bone or muscle or flesh, fingernails. The DNA tells this body how all of these cells are going to differentiate as they grow. So, they normally work together, and when they do, we have an absolutely amazing machine. And seriously, I look at my body as a machine. I don't look at it as anything supernatural or fancy or crazy. To me, it's just a machine that holds my soul and my spirit. And it's a good machine. It works. And every morning when I wake up in the morning, I kind of sit on the edge of bed and stretch a little bit. And thank you, Lord, this body still works pretty good. And I get through the day. But let's go back and let's just look at one plain, simple cell and how it goes about this division. Because it's rather a complicated process.
For a typical eukaryotic cell, this will last about 80 minutes. During the first stage of mitosis, called prophase, we first see the classic chromosome structure. This occurs through a condensation process. At the same time, protein strands called microtubules appear from the centrosomes in animals. Finally, a structure found within the nucleus, the nucleolus, disappears. Next, prometaphase begins when the nuclear membrane is broken down. At the same time, microtubule strands or spindle fibers are growing from the centrosomes. These strands attach to a protein structure called the kinetochore. One kinetochore is attached to the centromere of each sister chromatid. Next comes metaphase. During this stage, the sister chromatids align along the center of the cell so that both chromatids face toward opposite poles of the cell. Now the sister chromatids are ready to be separated. This occurs during anaphase through a shortening of the microtubules attached to the kinetochores. Additionally, the poles of the cell move farther apart, causing increased separation of sister chromatids. At the end of anaphase, the sister chromatids have moved to the two ends of the cell. Telophase is the final stage of mitosis. It is here the components of the new cells begin to appear. At this point, the spindle fibers are broken up. A new nuclear membrane surrounds the chromosomes at the end of each cell, and the chromosomes uncoil and return to an uncondensed state. Mitosis is now complete. The formation of two cells is all that remains. Following mitosis, the cell undergoes a process called cytokinesis. First, the cell is compressed by a contractile ring that divides the cell in nearly equal halves. By now, the organelles in the cell have been replicated and are now divided between the two halves of the cell. This includes mitochondria, Golgi bodies, and the rough ER. Plant cells also have chloroplasts. Once split, the two new cells are now fully in the G1 stage of interphase and ready again to begin their growth.
Now that's pretty simple. It doesn't look all that complicated. And yet next week when we look at the DNA in the chromosomes, we're going to find out it's a lot more complicated than we thought. And what I want you to remember as well is this process in each cell happens every couple of days. The cells divide and they reproduce and create an exact duplicate over and over again. Now, when they do this, how long does it take for one cell to accomplish this process? Well, in the human body, it takes about 80 minutes. About an hour and a half to completely create a brand new cell exactly like the previous cell had been. Now, how complicated is this? Well, next week you're going to find out. It's really complicated, but we have a kind of an example that we like to give. All right? This is the process simplified. You can see the different stages that it goes through. Each picture represents those phases that you saw in the video. Seems simple enough. When you see it done like this, doesn't seem to be difficult at all. But consider this. Each one of those chromosomes is so complicated and so full of a DNA molecule full of information that it is more complicated than a watch. Now, consider this. Making a watch by itself is difficult enough. But making all of the components in such a way that they fit perfectly, and then a spring is in there, and another spring is in there, and these springs, they operate different gears and levers and such that the watch works. Now, a lot of us don't even have watches like that anymore. We often have electronic and digital watches and such, but that kind of watch is so complicated that I would not ever venture to try and make one. It takes too delicate and too fine of a work to create the components alone that go into making a watch. How many of you would like to try and make a bet with me? Let's say I offer you $1 million if you can take all these parts, I'll supply the parts already made, and give them to you, and you put them in a shoebox, and you start shaking that shoebox, and I don't care how many times you shake the shoebox, but if you can get all those parts to fall together and start working, and you create a ticking, working watch, I would give you $1 million. Now, who would take that bet? I wouldn't worry about losing that bet because I guarantee you that you would never do it in 1,000,000 years, no matter what you did. The parts are never going to fall together, and those springs are never going to compress themselves in such a way that they can fit in the watch and then start putting pressure on the components and make them work. It's not going to happen. Even the smartest man in the world would have to admit it is impossible. It will never happen. So, you would regret taking that bet if you ever did, because you'd never get it to work. But what I'm getting to is this. The human body is far more complex than even the nicest, fanciest, most expensive watch you can imagine. The intricacy of how our body works and how everything seems to work so perfectly together. I mean, the kidneys, the heart, the liver, all these specialized organs make this body work. So, what do we think of? Well, the book of Psalms, chapter 139, verses 13 and 14 says this. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Now David, who wrote the Psalms, is also the one who said, the heavens declare your glory. Yeah, the heavens and the earth shows your handiwork. And it does. Anybody who would take the time to look at this world closely would realize it's no accident. There's not even a remote possibility that it just happened to fall into place and start working somehow. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You know, our God is truly an amazing God. He created this universe and everything in it. You know, this universe is astounding. But just the earth, just this one little small piece of the universe is incredible. It is so full of God's handiwork that I don't know how anybody can fail to see the Creator in the creation. Because that's what it is. God has made all things. It doesn't really matter where you look. Big things, small things, no matter what you look at, God is there in the detail. You can't get away from Him. No. You really can't run away from God. You can't hide from God. Psalms 139, verses 7 to 12 say this. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light becomes night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day. For darkness is as light to you. Our God, impossible to get away from, impossible to run away from. He is everywhere. He is in everything, showing us His handiwork. Our God is a God of order. He is not a God of chaos. He loves things to work perfectly. And this universe around us, as we continue and study it and look at it, we're going to realize just how perfect God's creation actually is. This universe screams out, God is here. His presence is everywhere. It's obvious to anyone who will look at it with an open mind and not try and exclude God as part of the equation. Because in reality, when you come down to trying to get an answer to the problems of this world and the complexity of it, the only answer is there's a creator, a God who has made this. You know, I think in these latter days that God is revealing more and more to people of Himself. In science, we're seeing more and more discoveries that are showing us God, God, God. He's here. This is His. And as archaeologists dig and discover more and more things, we're finding the Bible is proven over and over again. These things are true. These people are real. This stuff happened. So between the existence of God and knowing it's there because of His creation and looking at the Bible and studying it and realizing it's true, God and the Bible together give us the perfect combination of how we need to live. God has been patient, but you know, He is ending it. The times we see around us, it looks like God is wrapping it all up and getting ready to throw it away. And literally, that's what He is going to do. He's going to throw away this earth and this set of universal things that we call the heavens. He's going to have a new heaven and a new earth that He has already created. And that is where we will live and spend eternity. Time, though, is running out. And we all have an obligation to share the gospel with those around us, that Jesus came to this earth, that he died on a cross. He saves us from our sins because he had no sin of his own. He became a curse for us and died the most horrible death you can imagine to pay the price of even the worst possible sin so that we could have eternal life with him one day in heaven.